Hello, crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsSaysSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana episode. All supplies I'm using for this project are listed and linked in the video description below. Today, I am creating a Christmas card with the Simon Says Stamp Joyful stamp set. This card is going to have a very bold and modern and sort of a graphic look to it. It's going to have a lot of contrast. I love cards like this. I don't make nearly enough cards like this, and I think I should. I'm so glad I made this one. I hope you'll like this idea, and I hope you'll join me. So I'm starting to work on my card by using a sheet of Simon Says Stamp Schoolhouse red cardstock. I just love how vibrant and beautiful this color is. I have my mini MISTI stamping tool, and I have placed a grip mat inside my MISTI, and I'm now placing the big joyful sentiment right inside or right in the center of my panel. So the idea is to have one main sentiment heat embossed in gold embossing powder and then fill the rest of the background or stamp the rest of the background with the same sentiment but do it tone on tone. I'm using an anti-static powder tool from Simon to apply some powder onto my paper. This is going to help eliminate any grease or, fingerprints that I have on my paper, and this is going to help me keep my embossing nice and neat. Next, I inked up the stamp with clear embossing ink, and I'm stamping this onto my panel. I'm pressing really hard, trying to make sure that I have a good ink transfer. This is a brand new stamp, so I am being extra careful. I'm paying extra amount of attention to make sure that I have a very good impression. So I'm going to remove my panel from the MISTI, grab a sheet of scrap paper, and then apply the Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder onto my panel. I'm going to tap lightly. I don't want to remove too much powder, but I do want to make sure that I tap on the paper just a little bit. And now I'm ready to use my heat tool to heat set this image and melt the powder in place. I'm just going to let my heat tool run for a little bit before it gets nice and hot, and then I'm going to heat set this image. It doesn't take long to heat set once your heat tool is good and hot, and as you can see, we have the joyful sentiment heat set or heat embossed on our background. It looks very beautiful. Now, it does look a little bit flat, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this panel back inside my MISTI, and I'm going to do this again. I'm going to heat emboss the same image again. I have placed the panel inside my MISTI. The panel did warp a little bit from heat embossing. And I mean, this is normal. When you do heat embossing, you do get a certain amount of warping to your images. So I'm re-inking my stamp with a clear embossing ink, and I'm re-stamping the same image onto my panel in that clear embossing ink. I'm next going to add my Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder. My image is lined up perfectly, so I'm just tapping on the back to remove the excess powder. And now I'm ready to heat set this using my heat tool. You can repeat this several times, actually. You might even want to repeat this 3 times to have even more powder on your image. I felt that having 2 layers of embossing powder was quite enough for this design. So as I heat set, you can see that beautiful gold heat embossing on my background. I love the look of gold on red. There's just something special about it. It kind of screams Christmas to me, and I just love this. We do have quite a bit of that anti-static powder still on the panel, and what I'm going to do now, I've let the panel sit for a little bit. I've let the powder cool, and now that it's cool, I'm using just a regular pencil eraser, and I'm basically erasing that anti-static powder from my background. This is my simple trick for getting rid of that anti-static powder from your background. If you are doing heat embossing on white cardstock, the powder won't show because basically it's white on white, but if you are doing heat embossing and applying that anti-static powder onto colored cardstock, especially the darker colors of cardstock, it will always show. So it's always best to erase it using a pencil eraser once you are done with your embossing. But do be careful. Let your embossing powder cool. Don't try to erase the anti-static powder right away, right after you're done with your embossing, because you might smear your embossing powder, and I have done that. That has happened to me. So just let it cool for a few seconds. Okay, now I have switched to a larger MISTI, and once again, I have a grip mat inside my MISTI, and the grip mat is really great for holding your paper in place. Usually, you don't need to use the magnets when you have the grip mat, but because my paper warped a little bit from that heat embossing, I am using the magnets to press it down in place and make sure that it's not going to lift up with my stamp. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to fill the background with that same joyful sentiment, but I'm going to stamp it in clear embossing ink. So I'm just going to do tone on tone stamping for the rest of the background. And that's a really cool technique. I'm basically using just one stamp and I'm repeat stamping it to create a pattern, to create a beautiful background for my card. And to help draw attention to a certain part of my card, I just heat emboss that sentiment. So we have the same message stamped multiple times, but one message is embossed in gold embossing powder. Now I did re-ink my clear embossing ink pad just to make sure I had enough ink there, as I kind of felt like I wasn't getting quite enough ink on my paper, so I re-inked it using a re-inker. I'm also using a chamois and I'm wiping my clear stamp clean between the impressions just because I don't want to have any accidental ink transfer on my background. So I keep moving my panel, I keep making additional impressions until I have the background filled. And this is such a simple card design. You can recreate this using many different stamps in your stash. It doesn't have to be a sentiment. You can use an image. It can be an ornament. It can be a Christmas tree. It can be a house. Lots and lots of different things can be stamped like this. So just stamp one main element and heat emboss it in gold embossing powder, and then do the rest of the elements in clear embossing powder for a tone-on-tone look. And also, by the way, you can do this on other colors of cardstock. It doesn't have to be red. Any colored cardstock, I think, would look great for this technique. If you are trying to make a Christmas card, I think using green cardstock for the background is also a fabulous idea, especially if you are heat embossing an image of a Christmas tree. So here's a look at our background. I just love this. Okay, moving on. So next I'm going to create a card base for my card, and I'm using the same Schoolhouse red cardstock for the card base. I just wanted to have the same look. I want to have the same color background for my card base as I'm using for the card front. Technically, you could have done all of that stamping on the card front, but like I said, your paper warps slightly from all of the heat. So I knew I wanted to do this on a separate sheet of panel, on a separate sheet of cardstock, and then just adhere that panel, adhere that sheet onto my card front. Now, my trick for flattening panels that have warped slightly is the following. I like to use scrap card bases. So I have these card bases in my stash. They are made from textured cardstock, and that's not really the type of cardstock that I like to use for my card bases. So I use that cardstock, I use these card bases as sort of a means to flatten a background. So I just glue two card bases together. I did trim them down slightly, so they're not quite A2, they're just a little bit smaller. So I glue them shut and then I glue them together. So I now have this layer of 4 pieces of cardstock, and that helps flatten that panel. So I'm using glue. This is Barely Arts glue to adhere the 4 scrap panels onto my background. And then I'm using glue to adhere this entire cluster onto my card base. And this usually helps flatten it. It doesn't flatten it completely, but it ends up being nearly flat. Now, if you want, you can also add a panel of white cardstock to the inside of your card, but I think keeping it red is fine. You can still use a regular pen or pencil to write your personalized message on the inside. Or if you want, you can even use a white pen, like a Jelly Roll pen from Sakura, to write the message inside your card. Now, at this point, I kind of felt like I wanted to add an additional sentiment. So I went and looked through my stash for some foiled sentiments. I have a little bucket of sentiments that have been pre-made and pre-foiled. So I looked through that and I kind of, picked one that I liked. And I really like this Merry Christmas sentiment. This was created using a Better Press plate from Spellbinders, and instead of better pressing the sentiment, I foiled it in matte gold foil, and then I cut it out using a coordinating die. So I now have this little banner sentiment, and I'm just trying to decide where I want it on my cards. You can play with placement. You can have it at the bottom, you can have it vertically, you can have it at the top. I kind of felt like I liked it the most overlapping part of my sentiment, so I'm placing it over the full part of the heat embossed joyful, and I quite like this look. So this finishes my card for today. I hope you like it. I hope you'll give it idea a try. If you do make a card inspired by this video, please share it online. Please tag us. We always love seeing what you make. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.